Imagine standing on a frozen plain where the wind cuts like a blade and the sun barely rises for months. In this world, one animal, quiet, patient, and seemingly ordinary, was believed to hold the power to decide whether entire families lived or died. Medieval people called it a companion, a guide, even a messenger between worlds. But why did the reindeer become sacred? And how did an animal so gentle shape the entire rhythm of life in the Arctic for centuries? Tonight, you're going to step into a landscape where survival depended on following the herd, and where every hoofprint in the snow carried the weight of myth, ritual, and human hope. Settle in, get comfortable, and let this forgotten story of medieval Lapland unfold slowly, because the truth behind reindeer religion is far more fascinating and far more human than you might expect. You are about to be carried far north, into a world where winter ruled most of the year, and where the people who lived beneath that frozen sky relied on an animal that shaped nearly every corner of their existence. In medieval Lapland, the homeland of the Sámi people, you would find a landscape where the reindeer did far more than simply graze across the snow-covered tundra. The reindeer was a source of food and survival, yes, but it was also a spiritual bridge, a creature that seemed to stand between the human world and the realm of higher powers. In the Middle Ages, long before the image of the reindeer was softened into holiday folklore, the animal held a role that was far quieter, far deeper, and in many ways, far stranger. If you imagine medieval Europe, you may picture bustling towns, stone castles, and kings wrapped in velvet robes. But if you continue moving north past the forests of Sweden and Norway, past the icy rivers and scattered fishing huts, you eventually reach a region where such images begin to melt away. In this place, wooden castles were of little use, paved streets were unknown, and the seasons controlled nearly every aspect of life. Here, among the Arctic winds, the Sámi people lived in small semi-nomadic communities, shifting with the movements of the reindeer herds that sustained them. These herds were not just sources of meat or milk. They were the heart of the economy, the inspiration for mythology, the target of rituals, and the animals that determined the rhythm of life itself. In medieval times, the landscape shaped everything. You can imagine yourself walking through this world, through vast plains that stretch farther than your eyes can see, interrupted only by the gentle rise of hills, a few clusters of birch trees, or the dark line of a frozen lake. The cold here is not the kind that bites for a moment and then leaves you alone. It is a presence, a constant companion that you learn to live with. And because life in this place could shift from comfortable to dangerous in a matter of minutes, the people developed a worldview that blended practical knowledge with spiritual intuition. What modern observers might call superstition was, for the medieval Sámi, simply the logic of survival. The reindeer, central to their existence, became something more than an animal. It was believed to possess a special relationship with the spirits of nature, a bridge to what lay beyond human understanding. In the medieval Sámi religion, an ancient belief system already old by the time the Middle Ages began, the world was divided into multiple layers. The visible world was only one of them, and beneath or above it lay unseen realms filled with ancestral spirits, nature guardians, and forces that influenced everything from weather patterns to hunting luck. To the medieval Sámi, these spirits were not distant or abstract. They were as present as the wind, as real as the lakes and forests. And so rituals developed, slow and quiet, designed to maintain balance between humans and the powers that shaped the Arctic world. In many of these rituals, the reindeer played a role. Certain reindeer, often those with unusual markings or behaviors, were believed to be spiritually significant. These were not eaten or used for labor, but were instead considered sacred animals connected to the gods. Some families kept such reindeer for generations, allowing them to roam freely, but always maintaining a quiet form of guardianship. These beliefs influenced everything from hunting practices to migration patterns. If a herd began moving earlier than expected, the medieval Sámi interpreted the change as a sign from the spirits. If the animals grew restless, the people watched closely, believing that the reindeer could sense upcoming storms or shifts in the landscape long before humans could. And because the herds were essential for survival, every detail, the thickness of the reindeer's fur, the direction of its gaze, even the way it stamped its hooves, could be interpreted as a message. The spiritual role of the reindeer was most visible during ceremonies led by the Noati, the Sámi shamans, who served as healers, guides, and mediators between worlds. In medieval times, the Noati performed rituals using drums, which were painted with symbols representing the layers of the universe. Through rhythmic drumming and chanting, the Noati entered trance-like states, seeking guidance from spirits about hunting, weather, health, or upcoming dangers. Reindeer antlers often played a role in these ceremonies. They could serve as ritual objects or as symbols placed near the sacred areas where the Noati began their spiritual journeys. For people living in the Arctic, every part of the reindeer offered something valuable. The hides were used for clothing, tents, and bedding. The bones became tools, needles, and instruments. The sinew served as thread. The meat provided food through long, dark winters. Milk from domesticated reindeer supplied nourishment during months when gathering or fishing were difficult. Even the reindeer's hooves could be shaped into tools or musical instruments. This complete reliance on a single animal meant that the reindeer occupied a place in medieval Sámi consciousness that few animals have ever held elsewhere in the world. It was not simply livestock. It was a companion, a provider, a teacher, a messenger, and a creature whose presence offered both physical and spiritual security. At the same time, the relationship between humans and reindeer was not always simple. In medieval Lapland, reindeer were semi-domesticated, but still deeply connected to the wild. A herd might graze peacefully near a settlement for weeks, only to wander off in search of new feeding grounds. The Sámi people followed them, adjusting their movements throughout the year based on where the reindeer traveled. This pattern created a life shaped by constant change, a quiet, rhythmic migration that mirrored the movements of the seasons themselves. Summer brought long days and short nights, with the sun hovering above the horizon even at midnight. Winter brought darkness that stretched for months. Through all of it, the reindeer moved across the tundra, searching for food. And the people followed. The medieval Sámi developed techniques to manage these herds, though not in the strict, enclosed manner associated with later agricultural societies. Instead, their approach relied on deep observation, patience, and respect for natural rhythms. Herding dogs helped guide the animals during seasonal migrations. Reindeer were marked with distinctive cuts on their ears so families could identify which animals belonged to them. In medieval society, these marks were considered important property records, just as written documents were in other parts of Europe. Though the Middle Ages were a time of castles and wars elsewhere, medieval Lapland was shaped far more by the subtleties of weather, the migration of herds, and the quiet knowledge passed down through generations. While knights struggled over territory in the south, the Sámi struggled over something just as significant, but perhaps less dramatic: the ability to survive winters that could kill a person within hours. And through it all, the reindeer remained the steady center of life. Of course, medieval Lapland was not isolated from the rest of the world. Traders traveled north from Scandinavia and Russia, exchanging goods such as metal tools, grain, or cloth for Sámi products like furs, hides, and fish. These interactions brought new ideas, new beliefs, and occasionally new conflicts. Christian missionaries attempted to influence Sámi religious practices during the Middle Ages, slowly introducing new faiths into the region. But even as Christianity took root in some areas, the older traditions surrounding reindeer remained. They were too deeply tied to survival, too intimately connected to everyday life, to be easily replaced. Sometimes missionaries reported that the Sámi were stubborn or resistant, to giving up their old ways, describing the reindeer rituals as pagan practices. But to the Sámi, these rituals were less about religion in the modern sense, and more about maintaining the delicate balance required to survive in an unforgiving landscape. They had watched reindeer for centuries, learning how the animals responded to snow patterns, predators, weather changes, and migrations. Their spirituality was intertwined with this knowledge, creating a worldview where the sacred was not separate from the practical. Over time, the relationship with the reindeer became even more complex. In the later medieval period, some families began to specialize in reindeer herding, building larger herds that required more organized management. With these changes came new social structures, new responsibilities, and new forms of wealth based on herd size rather than land ownership. But even as reindeer herding evolved, the spiritual significance of the animals persisted. You can imagine a medieval Sámi family sitting in a lavu, a traditional tent, on a long winter night. Outside, the wind pushes snow across the frozen landscape, and somewhere in the distance, a reindeer snorts or scratches at the ground in search of lichen. Inside, the fire crackles, casting shadows across the curved walls of the tent. An elder speaks in a low voice, telling a child how the reindeer once came from the realm of the gods, or how the first shaman learned to travel between worlds by following a reindeer spirit across the sky. These stories were not just entertainment. They were the threads that tied the community together, connecting ancient knowledge to present challenges. By the end of the medieval period, the world was beginning to change. New forms of trade, new political influences, and the slow expansion of government authority into the far north altered aspects of Sámi life. Yet the reindeer remained. This quiet, strong creature continued to shape the daily existence of those who lived among the Arctic winds. And even as centuries passed, many of the medieval beliefs lingered in subtle ways. They were not discussed openly, perhaps, but they lived on in the rhythms of herding, the respect shown to certain animals, and the quiet understanding that survival in the far north required a relationship between humans and nature unlike anything found elsewhere. In the end, what we call reindeer religion was not a single belief, but a way of seeing the world, a worldview shaped by cold, darkness, migration, and deep observation. It was a reminder that life in the Arctic was fragile, and that the reindeer was more than a resource. It was a partner in survival, a symbol of endurance, and a creature that connected the visible world to something larger and more mysterious. When you step back and look at medieval Lapland from a distance, you begin to understand why the reindeer held such a sacred place. The animal offered food and warmth, but it also offered meaning. It helped people make sense of long winters, unpredictable weather, and a landscape that could shift from beautiful to deadly in a moment. And so, across centuries of snow-covered seasons, the people of medieval Lapland placed their trust and a part of their spiritual identity into the quiet strength of the reindeer. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you for taking this quiet journey through the frozen world of medieval Lapland. Stories like this remind us how deeply people once depended on the land, the seasons, and the animals they lived beside, especially the humble reindeer, whose presence shaped both survival and belief. If you enjoyed this peaceful dive into forgotten history, feel free to join me again for more slow, calming stories from the past. Your support helps this channel continue exploring the small details that history often leaves behind. Until next time, rest well, stay curious, and may your night be as gentle as falling snow.